start with the story that is really getting people excited, I think, is probably the good way of putting it this morning, because it would be a game changer, certainly when it comes to two-party politics, certainly when it comes to what the money could be spent on. This apparent donation that is being considered by Elon Musk to Nigel Farage, the Reform Party, of $100 million. What effect do you think that would have?
I mean, $100 million buys you a lot of campaign leaflets, doesn't it? It really would be, as you say, potentially a game changer. In this country, obviously, we don't have state-funded political parties, so parties have to hustle to go out there and try and raise as much money as they can from private donors. Now, if the richest man in the world is wanting to support your party, then I think you would be daft to look a gift horse in the mouth. You would obviously look to accept that money, depending on what strings are attached. But yeah, certainly in terms of giving Reform financial muscle, this would be a huge boost to that party. And you have to say a blow to the other parties, because suddenly you would have a major competitor.
And but do you think, though, that it would be hypocritical if Reform took this money? Because Farage particularly was very critical of the Labour campaigners that went out and were being activists against Donald Trump, campaigning in favour of Kamala Harris. And wouldn't this constitute something similar? Someone who is not from the country of where the election and the electoral process is taking place, interfering?
No, you're right. I mean, it would be, by any stretch of the imagination, a foreign interference. You know, as I say, a rich American, the richest American, or South African, giving money to the Reform Party. But to be honest with you, I think Nigel Farage would probably swallow his principles a little bit when it comes to that, because it's just such a huge amount of money. And it comes at a time, of course, don't forget, when Reform are doing really well in the opinion polls, you know, considering that they are basically a new party, and, you know, they're from a standing start, this, you know, and they're breathing down the necks, not just of the Conservatives, but of Labour as well. And there's lots of seats where Reform came second in the general election. Money like this on the ground could really boost their campaigning efforts and really boost their campaigning with the local elections in May coming up. And that's before you even get to the next general election in 4 or 5 years' time.
Do you know, there are a few principles I couldn't think that I would, that I can't think I wouldn't abandon if it meant $100 million in my pocket, actually. So I think that most people would say, well, yeah, okay, you're being a bit of a hypocrite, Nigel, but yeah, we understand why. We understand the 100 million reasons why you're perhaps being a little bit hypocritical. So that's not great reading for the Labour Party this morning, Keir Starmer particularly. The other bit of unpleasant reading for them this morning is this story of business confidence in the United Kingdom being at its lowest level since the COVID lockdowns. This is a survey that has come from the Institute of Directors. 600 of the top bosses of United Kingdom companies, and the chief economist at the Institute of Directors has said that as businesses absorb the budget, confidence has continued to plummet and is approaching the lows reached at the onset of the COVID pandemic. Far from fixing foundations, the budget has undermined them. Now, this comes, of course, after the survey putting consumer confidence at the lowest that it's been as well, I think possibly in history. So this is really disastrous reading for the Labour Party, isn't it?
It is, you're right, but it also comes on the back of other business groups, notably CBI. They had their conference last week, made very clear that they were unhappy with the budget, very unhappy with the increase in employers' national insurance. So perhaps it's no surprise that more business groups are now imparting their gloomy prognosis about the economy towards the government. And yeah, there's no doubt at the moment the government has been assailed on all sides, really. They've got the farmers' protest, you've got the pensioners with the winter fuel payment, and business are very, very unhappy, undoubtedly, about what Rachel Reeves announced in the budget. And, given that Labour have said repeatedly that their number one mission is to grow the economy, they need business on side, because it's business that creates
Kevin, I'm so confused, though, because if you are saying growth, I want to grow the economy, that is number one, paragraph one, sentence one of our manifesto, we want to grow the economy. Why are they making decisions which you do not need to be an economist to look at and think, well, that doesn't make sense? You don't need to be a Labour voter, you don't need to be a Tory voter. This is not a party political comment that one can make about this. It is just simply, you don't grow an economy by penalising the people that will grow it.
No, you're right. I mean, that is the argument that has been made repeatedly by the private sector, big businesses. Now, the counter-argument that Labour and the government put forward is that, well, they had no choice. They had to, quote, fix the foundations. There was a £22 billion black hole. They say the Conservatives wrote a whole load of cheques that they could not possibly hope to cash. Then they were booted out of office and Labour were left to pick up the tab. So there was this black hole and they had to fill it. And Rachel Reeves looked at all the options and decided as well, don't forget, they boxed themselves in prior to the election by saying they wouldn't increase income tax, national insurance, although now they say they meant employees' national insurance, or VAT. So her room for manoeuvre was very tight indeed. So they hit upon the idea, well, let's put up employers' national insurance. That way we can say we're not attacking workers' bottom line, their pay slips. But what it does do is it makes it much more difficult for them to achieve, as I say, that top mission of theirs, which is to grow the economy. So, if I was Rachel Reeves, I'd have my fingers and toes crossed for the next few months to hope that somehow the economy starts to grow, because if it doesn't, then they're in an awful lot of trouble. Have they ever actually outlined what exactly the 22 billion consists of? They did, actually. At the budget, they published a document which showed where that £22 billion adds up to. Obviously, the Conservatives dispute a lot of the claims within it. They point out that billions and billions of that has gone to ending the railways strike, for instance. Big pay rises for union members there. They say, well, maybe you could have held out a little bit. Labour say, well, hang on a minute, these were independent recommendations which you didn't go along with, but someone was going to have to pay the money to end these strikes. So the numbers are disputed. As I say, the Conservatives say basically Labour have made up the 22 billion as an excuse to put up taxes, which they always wanted to do anyway. But we can argue over that till the cows come home. The bottom line is the decisions have been taken. £40 billion worth of tax rises have been announced in the budget. They haven't even kicked in yet. It won't even kick in until next year. But already we can see from what the Institute of Directors are saying that business confidence is already on the floor. And as I say, you need the business community on side if you want to grow the economy. And if they don't grow the economy, it's not just a case that they're not meeting their pledges. It means that they don't have the money to fund a lot of the things that they want to do. And does that mean that in a future budget they have to put up taxes again? Well, Rachel Reeves said last week that she wouldn't do that. Although, interestingly, Keir Starmer, when asked by Kemi Badenoch at PMQs last week, wouldn't repeat that pledge. So I think that's one to keep an eye on as well. OK, finally, one of the other decisions that they've made, which is clearly coming back to bite them on the backside, is this winter fuel payment cut to pensioners, which will save them over £1 billion. But of course, whilst that's an absolutely eye-watering sum of money, sort of a drop in the ocean when you consider some of the figures that have been bandied around that they are claiming that they need to fill this black hole with. Now, we're seeing on the front page of the Mail on Sunday this morning the revelation that Liz Kendall, of course, who has overseen the policy of removing this winter fuel payment from pensioners, she has received nearly £4,000 in order to heat her second home. This is, of course, a legitimate expense that you are allowed to claim, because as an MP you need, usually if you're outside of London, substantially outside London from your constituency, then of course you need
two homes. And I think it's Leicester East is her constituency, and that's how she's managed to claim this money. No rules being broken, but of course pretty terrible optics.
Yeah, you're right. I think it is important to stress that there is no rules being broken. As she obviously, they're highlighting Liz Kendall because of her job, working pension secretary, having to implement these unpopular cuts. But politically, it doesn't look great. But I would say, though, that every MP, as you say, Cristo, outside London, does have a second home, usually has a second home, which they have to fund in their constituency. And I think it's only right, really, that that has to happen. What we don't want is to have a load of MPs who are so wealthy that they don't need to worry about running two homes at the one time and can pay for it out of their own pocket. I think that leads to even more problems. But politically, you're right, it doesn't look great, although, as we say, no rules have actually been broken.
But it's about the optics, isn't it? Because I think it's not dissimilar to the clothing donation story, is it? In as much as, again, you know, the letter of the rules, I think in some of those, although there was impropriety with some of them being the way in which they were categorised, some weren't claimed at all. But those that were allowed to be claimed for, the rules not being broken on those clothing items that were being bought for the leadership of the government. Again, it's just the optics, isn't it? You can't take away from what is considered a vulnerable group and then not expect, even though you may be abiding by the rules, those optics to be absolutely dreadful.
No, you're right. I mean, if you are a pensioner who is losing out on their winter fuel payment and you pick up the Mail on Sunday this morning and you read that story, you're going to be furious. I guess the other point to make is that Liz Kendall will obviously pay her own fuel bills on her own home, on her first property.
Yes.
Whatever that is. But, you know, in the second home... It's
a £4 million Notting Hill mansion, which again is not the greatest of optics.
Great optics there. that is true. But yeah, you know, when your luck's out, your luck's out, and the message that the government are trying to get across to pensioners is, you know, we've all got to tighten our belts. However, the real anger about the winter fuel payment, I think most people agree that multi-millionaire pensioners, and there aren't that many of them, but they shouldn't be getting a winter fuel payment. But it's where the cut-off, where the threshold has been decided.
But it's also how you implement the threshold. And if trying to bring in that threshold means that multi-millionaire pensioners get the winter fuel payment so that every single vulnerable pensioner does, I don't have a problem with multi-millionaire pensioners getting it, because I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. But that's just like my personal view on it. Good to talk to you, Kevin Schofield, political editor at the Huffington Post.